Okay, so some of you asked me to do a video showing how I do my seascape paintings. So I'm going to show you this one, or the beginnings of it anyway, and I'm just going to talk to you a bit about how to approach a painting. So this painting I'm doing is for a client's, she's doing as a gift for her parents' wedding anniversary, and it's a beautiful seascape. It's a photo that I know is from, I believe, Seascape. Oh goodness, now I don't remember. I think it was Seascape. It might be the Sunshine Coast. So in the photo, and I'll put the reference photo below the video, this is all ocean. And you can see this is the horizon line, okay? And then here we have some islands, and this is where the clouds are gonna be, and this is a little kind of rocky outcropping. So the way that I start a painting is I always do an underpainting. So in classical painting, this was taught. I'm not entirely sure if it was to know where you haven't put paint, but what I will tell you is that the color you put on your canvas behind informs the colors of the rest of the painting. I almost always use quinacridone crimson. Sometimes I'll use quinacridone azul gold, but quinacridone crimson is a really nice color to use because it adds a warmth to your painting. The pink hue that it provides also tends to look really pretty as just left bare as the pink part of clouds. A little bit more of an advanced discussion is about what happens when you paint with acrylic paints. So whenever you add white to your acrylic paints, as we did with our values lesson, it'll take your color and make it more pastel. But the thing with acrylic paints is that they're transparent and some of them are opaque. So when you add white to a paint, what you're doing is you're making it more opaque, okay? So opacity sometimes can be good to cover things, but sometimes you don't want to cover things. Sometimes you want to do layers of color. And when you have a background color like this, when you layer on top of it, some of the pink is going to shine through. Another very modern way of painting is to leave the underpainting showing between your brush strokes on purpose. You'll see this in a lot of Erin Hansen's paintings. She's an amazing artist from California who now has, I think, 2 galleries of her own, and she sells her paintings for like tons of money, like 20,000 US for something about this size. But her style is open impressionism, and the way she paints is she paints her background underpainting first, always in bright colors, usually with a bright pink, sometimes oranges and yellows, and then she layers on top of that with thick brush strokes. So the way I paint is similar in that I do this background. Then so this is quinacridone crimson. The next step that I do is I get out my ultramarine blue because it's a dark kind of color. It'll stand out against my underpainting, and I use this to kind of do the outline of where things are, to get the lay of the land, so to speak. Some people at this point might want to use a piece of chalk. So if you think you're going to make mistakes, you can use chalk and you can draw it, and then you can rub it out and draw it again. But I just like to go for it. But mind you, I've been doing this for a while, so for me it's a little easier just to do that. But anyway, you could do chalk, and my teacher that taught me a lot of acrylic technique recommends that. Okay, so once you've kind of roughed it in like this, then people say, well, where do you start? You know, isn't that sort of overwhelming? And when I first started painting acrylics again, which was 2 or 3 years ago, yes, it was overwhelming. But one of the things that I was taught to do is to break your painting down. So try not to worry too much about the details. What you're going to do first is paint the big areas of sort of one sweeping area at a time. And you're going to create realism by adding layers of color. So for example, one of the first things that we could tackle in this painting that would be very easy, and I think I might do this, is just paint these little islands. So paint that in, fill it in, just like your paint by numbers. Fill in this island, fill in this island, fill in this island. Full well knowing that the color you choose doesn't have to be the final color, but just get something on there, get something that's close, don't worry about it too much. You could then paint this whole section in, the color that approximates most of it, and then you could paint the entire ocean with the color that approximates that as well. With the sky, be careful. So the sky, with every sky that you do, remember, the sky is always the darkest color at the top and it gets lighter towards the bottom. If it's the middle of the day, it'll be a very dark blue to a light blue. If it's a sunset, it might be a dark blue fading into a rainbow of color if you really look at it, where it's a light yellow at the horizon, an orange here, a little bit of a greeny color, a light blue, and then a darker blue at the top. And then of course sunsets, it's very different, depends on the color, depends on the time of day. One other thing I would suggest with the painting is remember your underpainting color can help you. So if there's a part of your painting that you want to be this vibrant pink, you will never get that color back again. So every layer you put on top of it will ruin it to some degree. It'll take away its intensity. So if you want your clouds to be pink, just don't paint over that area. Leave the underpainting there. One final tip I'm gonna say before I get started is remember with acrylic paints, some of them are very opaque. Opaque means it paints over things, it covers them up. Other paints are transparent. So look at the back of your paint tube. I'll give you some examples here. So probably the most opaque paint we have is titanium white. And you'll notice on the back here, it doesn't even say opacity at all because it's just completely opaque, all right? Another one, just to demonstrate the concept here, is Hansa yellow. So if you look at the back here, you can see that on the scale of transparent to opaque, it's very transparent. On the scale of matte, which means not shiny, to gloss, it's on the glossy side. On the thinness to thickness, it's more on the thicker end. And on the tinting, low versus high, it's low tinting. So tinting is like how much pigment is there per gram of paint. So this one has less pigment and it's therefore more transparent. So this is a really nice yellow if you're trying to do layers. Remember, the way that you achieve realism with acrylic painting is by doing layers. So by layers, that means you paint something, you're gonna let it dry, and then what you're gonna do is make another layer of transparent paint, in other words, not completely opaque, and paint over areas. Or if you want, you can make an opaque paint and layer on top. But you're not gonna get things right from the get-go. So it's all about layering. So in other words, with this painting, I'm not gonna sit there and fiddle and paint the trees while I've got this big open space. What I'm gonna do is pick a color that represents that area and paint it, and do that for the whole painting. Then what I'm gonna do is come in and do a bit more detail, about the same level for each area. The final tip I want to give you is force yourself to paint with a bigger brush. As tempting as it is to go smaller brush right away, because you want to just get those details in there, that's the wrong idea. So I will show you what I do. So I force myself, when I'm first starting a painting, to start with a big brush. So when I do my underpainting, I use this. But when I'm starting to paint my little areas, I'm going to actually use this as well. The reason is it makes it so that I can't focus on the detail. I'm looking for big areas of color. I'm looking for big shapes, and I'm just painting them. Now, one other thing I just said there is important. When you're trying to make something look like a photo you have, one way to do that is to close one eye, and that takes away your three-dimensional perception. This also works really well when you're looking at something like a plein air painting. Today I was hoping to paint the scene here. And if I want to just compress everything flat, close one eye. So what that'll do is take a 3D image and put it into 2D. When things are 2D, it's a lot easier to see the shapes and the relationship. So that's why you see a lot of artists squinting at something. That's what they're trying to do. The other thing that I want to mention about painting subject matter is picking your subject matter and looking at what's called the composition. So composition is really important, and it's what makes a painting interesting or not interesting. So again, I talked in my previous video about the rule of thirds. This reference photo that was sent to me by the client, I was so excited when I saw it because it's a perfect rule of thirds reference. So again, you can see this is a canvas. If you divide it into 3 sections, 1, 2, and 3, look where your horizon line sits. So it's 2/3 on the bottom, 1/3 on the top. Your point of interest in this painting is kind of here actually, because it's where the intersection of this little peninsula is. You want the points of interest to be usually in this space, this space, this space, or this space of your painting, not in the center. And there's exceptions to that, but typically you want things to be a little off to the side. Diagonals are also really interesting in painting. So this has a very diagonal energy going this way. So that makes it interesting too. So don't just, take a scene and put, the horizon line right in the center here and paint it like that. That's actually a rookie mistake. Take a look at what you're trying to paint, and before you start painting, make sure that what you're painting is actually interesting to look at. The number one thing is remember the rule of thirds and try to organize the composition of what's going to be in your painting with that rule in mind, and it'll look way better. So I'm going to get started with this painting. I'll take some pictures as I go to show you guys the steps, and I hope that was helpful.